brothers and sisters, as I said at the beginning of Mass, it is indeed good to be with you. My name is Father Alek Schrank, and I am happy to be serving as the parochial vicar for these three parishes, assisting Father Greco, our new administrator. In the following weeks and months, I look forward to meeting and getting to know you all. All of our readings today touch on two central and indispensable themes of the gospel. And those are the value of redemptive suffering and the need for servant leadership in the world, in particular in the church. Those themes are so central because they're related to something even deeper and even greater, which is something that touches at the very heart of who Jesus Christ is and who we are as his disciples. It all goes back to the central act of our faith, the central act of salvation, which is the passion and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Our share in that great action of redemption is not always clear to us in the moment. In fact, sometimes it's very hard for us to grasp, because it's one thing to hear about these sort of things in a homily as sort of an abstract lesson about the gospel, and it's another thing entirely to have to live them out in our own lives, to suffer with and in and for Christ. This is something that the world does not understand, and our culture will give you very few tools for grasping something like that. As Christians, we always have one foot in that outside world, the world that tells us that suffering is meaningless and always to be avoided. Jesus' disciples were not immune to that attitude any more than we are today. We see that in today's gospel. We have James and John standing in for our own misunderstandings about Jesus' message, and they allow us to see the mistakes that we make so often as disciples of Jesus. We might even wonder, though, how James and John get it so incredibly wrong. They approach Jesus with an attitude that is as arrogant as it is opposed to everything that he's taught them so far. They come up to him and say, "Teacher, do whatever we ask you to do." This is extremely bold to say to anyone, let alone someone that you call your Lord and your Master. And there might be some virtue in that boldness. Jesus had asked them, or had told them, ask and it shall be given to you. So maybe they were taking that lesson to heart. But not in this case, because they have no idea what they're even asking of Christ. They want to share in this glory of his, but they have no idea what that actually means, what it means for them. At the core of their mistake is actually a misunderstanding, because their request reveals that they had no idea who Jesus really was. He is the Master, he is the Lord and the King, but his kingdom is not of this world. Above all, he is the suffering servant. He is that figure that was foretold in our first reading today from Isaiah, a passage that they would have all been familiar with. To be servants of such a master means that we must walk the path that he walked. We must drink the cup that he drank and be baptized with his baptism. In other words, we have to live our entire lives in imitation of Christ. That's no easy message to accept, not for James and John and not for us. We're often told that we have to pick up our crosses and follow after the Lord, but we still find ourselves wondering day to day, what use is our suffering when we suffer? Why are we afflicted with temptations? Why does the Lord challenge us if he loves us? And there's no way to answer those questions unless we accept and believe in the power of the cross. James and John had not yet seen Christ crucified and buried, and so they couldn't understand why he had to suffer. But neither had they seen the risen Lord, the marks of the nails still impressed in his hands and in his side. Unlike James and John, we have the benefit of knowing that after death, there is a rising to new life. And so we believe that whenever we bear our sufferings patiently and lovingly and in union with Christ, then there's nothing in our lives that is beyond his redemptive power. It's that faith in the resurrection, fundamentally, that leads the church to hold up a different model of leadership than the world does. Whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant, Jesus says. And as a priest, I'm extremely grateful for this gospel today, at this first Sunday liturgy that I'm celebrating with you, because it gives me the best possible way to introduce myself. More than anything, Father Greco and I are here to serve you in the image of Christ. At the same time, we need to make no mistake that the work that lies before us is going to be a very challenging one. I've been a priest for just over a year, and the task that lies before me and my brother priests is sometimes overwhelming to consider. We were having a staff meeting, and Father Greco volunteered to some of the staff at St. Margaret's that he has 14 years left until retirement, I think is what he said. He says, I have 14 years, not that I'm counting. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I have at least 40. But every day, I draw hope and inspiration from a deeply held belief. And that is the belief that at the end of this day, at the end of every day, this is not my church. It isn't Father Greco's church. And it's not Bishop Zubik's church either. It's not even the Pope's church. It is Jesus Christ's church. And together, we are serving him as our master and our teacher and our king. In that spirit, I do humbly ask for your prayers. Pray that Father Greco and myself, together with our parish chaplain, who's Father Robin Ivanish, will be good stewards of the church. Thank you for already welcoming us so warmly to serve as your priests. We have been so warmly welcomed at every Mass that we've celebrated so far, here at St. Simon and Jude, and also at Elizabeth Ann Seton and Margaret of Scotland. In the spirit of today's gospel, however, I do want to be totally honest with you that the next 3 years are going to be difficult in a lot of ways. Our 3 parishes have been asked to become one. And while that sounds easy on paper, even sort of elegant, certainly more efficient, the reality is going to be full of many, many challenges. Many of us now find ourselves in uncharted waters. I know Father Greco is not used to having to run around to go to different churches for Mass. For the past 2 summers, I was stationed up in Butler, where we have 3 parishes in the city, so at least I'm used to the idea of hop in your car and go. Totally new to Father Greco. When you look at the centuries-long history of the church, though, and this is sort of what I studied when I was in seminary, so I always try to bring it back to this context, it's clear that we have faced many, many greater challenges than what we face now. And out of it all, God used the opportunity to raise up great saints, to pour out incredible graces upon his church, and ultimately to bring new life to his people. He will do the same today, and that I can absolutely promise you. The choice that he gives each one of us is whether we want to participate in that renewal. And in fact, we were given that choice long ago. Not as long for some people as others. It was a choice that was laid before us when we were baptized. Like James and John in today's gospel, we almost certainly had no idea what we were asking for when we accepted our faith as Catholic Christians. But God, in his loving providence for us, led us into his church so that he could give us new life. And today and every day, we are given the chance to accept that gift or, sadly, to reject it. The Spirit that lives within us urges us to choose life. Life for ourselves, life for our families, and life for our church. I truly believe that God is never outdone in his generosity to us. And if we enter into these next 3 years in a spirit of faith and hope and love, we will be astounded at the renewal that God will work both in and through us, not just here in Scott Township and Green Tree and Carnegie, but all over our city of Pittsburgh and all over the church of this diocese. In the past few days, I've already had the opportunity to see that this parish probably knows what I'm talking about when I say renewal, because we've seen that what can happen when we really own our discipleship and embrace Jesus' model of servant leadership. I personally, as a newly ordained priest, stand in awe of Father Jay's accomplishments here at St. Simon and Jude. And as I'm sure that he would tell you himself if he were here, they're really not his accomplishments at all. It would be better to say that they're your accomplishments as a church. But ultimately, it would be best and most true to say that those accomplishments belong to God. Now, as we embark upon these years of potentially challenging transition, I think it's time for us to extend the many blessings that God has given to this parish. We will be called upon to trust God and to welcome others as our brothers and sisters. We will be called to lay aside any sort of sense of exclusivity or closed-mindedness. We will be asked to serve one another with the same sacrificial love that Christ has already shown us. So don't be deluded like James and John. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you can have God's glory without accepting his cross. Throughout it all, know that we are about to walk the path that Christ himself walked. He strengthens us for that journey with the Eucharist that we're about to celebrate. Our amen to Christ's body and to his blood is our acceptance for God's plan for each and every one of us, the way of the cross, which is our only way to salvation, our way to abundant new life.